The first time I saw her, she was standing in my driveway with a clipboard like she owned the street. Hair bleached into a stiff helmet, giant sunglasses, and a pastel cardigan wrapped around her shoulders like she was about to judge a golf tournament. Her name was Brenda. Of course it was. "I'm going to need you to keep your children off the lake trail," she said, without even bothering to introduce herself. I blinked. "Excuse me, the trail is private. For HOA members only," she said, tapping the clipboard, "and your kids have been riding their bikes and yelling. It disturbs the peace." I looked past her toward the trail that wound around the lake behind our houses. My daughter Odette and son Oliver were just putting their bikes away, still laughing. They'd been riding that trail since we moved in 6 months ago. "And we weren't renters, we bought our house outright." "I am an HOA member," I said slowly. "I bought the old Lancaster place." Brenda's lips twitched like I just told her I invented oxygen. "That property was grandfathered in before the neighborhood formed. The HOA doesn't recognize it. The trail's off limits." Now, I don't usually lose my temper over dumb stuff, but I'm also not about to let some clipboard tyrant tell my kids they can't ride their bikes on a public access trail behind our own home. "My name's Isaac Morrow," I said. "And unless you want to explain this to my lawyer, I suggest you back off." Brenda sniffed, flipped a page on her clipboard, and gave me a look like I was an idiot. "You're welcome to write a formal complaint," she said coolly. "But until then, those kids go nowhere near the trail. This is your first warning." Then she walked off like she just dropped the mic. Later that night, I dug out the deed and HOA docs from the safe. Something about her confidence bugged me. I found exactly what I was looking for, a clause dating back to the original developer agreement. My property had easement access rights to the lake and surrounding trails. Not only that, but it stated in plain language, and I quote, "Full recreational use of perimeter access paths shall be granted to residents of Parcel 1A. Guess what my house was? Parcel 1A. I made copies. Color-coded tabs, highlighted sections, notarized. The works. The next afternoon, I was out back watching Odette and Oliver toss a football when Brenda came storming down the trail like a hawk that smelled blood. Behind her were 2 other HOA board members, both looking like they wanted to be anywhere else. "I warned you," she snapped. "They're trespassing again." "Actually," I said, pulling the folder out from under my arm, "they're exercising their legal property rights." Brenda froze as I handed her the paperwork. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second. By the third, her face had gone pale. This isn't accurate," she muttered. "It's a certified copy of the original developer deed," I said. "Filed with the county. I double-checked with a real estate attorney this morning." One of the board members, a guy with a shaved head and a nervous smile, leaned over her shoulder. "He's right," he murmured. "That's the original easement agreement." Brenda looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. "That can't be, that trail is private." "Not to me it's not," I said. "And if you try to ban my kids again, I'll file a harassment complaint with the county." "Got it," she didn't answer. Just turned around and walked off without a word. The other 2 gave me a sheepish wave and followed her. I thought it was over. It wasn't. The next morning started with a surprise. A bright orange violation notice was duct taped to my front door, crooked, wrinkled, and impossible to remove without leaving a gummy residue. In bold letters, it claimed I had installed unauthorized landscaping features and would be fined $250 if not corrected within 72 hours. Landscaping features. I stared at my lawn. It was the same basic yard that came with the house: a maple tree, 2 shrubs, and a patch of mulch. Nothing had changed. Nothing new had been added. Then I noticed the unauthorized feature, a small wooden bench under the maple tree. It had been there when we moved in. Weathered, faded. The legs were even sinking a little on one side, clearly decades old. "Interesting," I muttered, pulling out my phone and snapping photos. By the time I made it to my truck, 3 more houses on my street had orange notices on their doors. The Jenkins family across the street, retired couple, quiet, always kept their yard immaculate, had a notice for excessive decorative lighting. They didn't even have porch lights on. Something was happening and Brenda was behind it. I drove straight to the county clerk's office. I wasn't just going to fight the fine, I wanted to see who had been filing these complaints and whether they were even authorized. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Kathleen, pulled the HOA filings and violation logs for my subdivision. "What are you looking for exactly?" she asked, eyebrows raised as she flipped through the records. "I want to know who signs off on the violations," I said, "and if there's a pattern." She squinted at the pages, then gave a low whistle. "Almost every violation from the past 90 days has been signed by the same person. B.C. Winslow, Brenda?" "Yep," I leaned in. "Can I get copies of these?" She hesitated. "You're a resident, right?" I pulled out my ID and proof of residence. She made the copies. Back home, things had shifted. Neighbors were outside, talking in hushed tones. I walked over to the Jenkins driveway, where Mr. Jenkins stood with a steaming mug and a confused frown. "You get one of those orange tags too?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "They say our porch lanterns are a potential hazard. We've had the same ones since '97. I handed him one of the documents. "That's Brenda's signature. She's targeting people." His wife joined us, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. "Why?" "I think she's trying to intimidate anyone who doesn't fall in line. She tried to kick my kids off the lake trail yesterday. Didn't go well for her." Mrs. Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "So this is retaliation." "Looks that way." That night, I called a few neighbors I'd met during block events and weekend barbecues. Within 2 hours, I had a group of 10 each with a bogus violation notice within the last week. A few hadn't even realized they'd been fined. We met in my garage. I had a corkboard, string, and every document I'd collected. Brenda's signature was on every last one. But what really made jaws drop was what I found buried in the HOA's financial disclosures available to residents by law. "Take a look at this," I said, pointing to a series of transactions under community improvement funds. The HOA had paid over $15,000 in landscaping services, all issued to a business called Winslow Property Solutions. "Tell me that's not her name," said Marisol, a nurse who lived 2 streets over. "It is," I said. "I checked. Registered to her maiden name, but the address on the business license is her house." Everyone went quiet. Colin, a freelance contractor, leaned forward. "Isn't that a conflict of interest?" "She's funneling HOA funds into her own business." "It's worse than that," I said. "She finds people, then uses the money to pay her own company to correct violations that never existed in the first place." "What do we do?" asked Mrs. Jenkins. "We expose her." The next day, I filed a formal complaint with the County Ethics Board and submitted the documentation. I also contacted a local reporter I knew from my days working with the city planning department before I switched careers and went private. No need to mention that to Brenda just yet. By Friday, a plain black SUV pulled into the neighborhood and parked in front of the HOA office, which was just a repurposed model home near the entrance gates. 2 county investigators stepped out. Their jackets bore the seal of the Office of Civil Code Enforcement. I watched from a distance, arms folded as Brenda opened the door, all fake smiles and fluttery gestures. That lasted about 90 seconds. The taller investigator handed her a folder, then pointed toward the filing cabinet inside. The other one stepped around her and started snapping photos of everything: binders, receipts, even the printouts on her corkboard. Brenda's body visibly stiffened. The next hour was glorious. Word spread like fire. Neighbors came out exchanging updates. Someone brought donuts. Brenda stayed inside, blinds drawn. The real kicker came Monday when a notice was taped to the HOA office door, this one from the county. Effective immediately, all HOA operations are suspended pending investigation into financial misconduct, abuse of authority, and fraudulent enforcement of code violations. No more fake fines, no more clipboard patrols, and Brenda. She resigned that afternoon, citing personal stress and community hostility. Apparently, she didn't expect the ethics board to forward their findings to the district attorney's office. I didn't see her again until 3 weeks later when I was walking with Odette and Oliver past the trail. She was being escorted to her car by 2 plainclothes officers. Her face was blotchy, her hair undone, and her hands were cuffed. Oliver leaned closer to me. "Dad, is that the mean lady?" "Not anymore," I said. Later, the neighborhood voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. We formed a volunteer committee instead, made up of actual residents who didn't have secret landscaping fronts or vendettas against children. The trail stayed open. The orange notices never came back. And as for the bench under the maple tree, I sanded it down and added a small plaque. "Reserved for anyone who stands up to bullies." By the time spring rolled in, the neighborhood had changed. The hanging baskets were fuller, the lawns a little less manicured, and the air at the block parties had a looser, more genuine feel. Without the constant threat of arbitrary rules or surprise fines, people relaxed. Fences got repainted in colors that actually matched personal taste. Front porches were filled with swing chairs, wind chimes, and conversation. The fear was gone, but something still didn't sit right with me. Brenda had been charged with financial misconduct and fraud, sure, but the investigation had only scratched the surface. The Ethics Board's interim report had focused on her misuse of HOA funds and illegal fines, but there were entries in the ledgers that didn't add up: payments marked as insurance remediation and environmental review consulting that had no corresponding projects or receipts. I didn't let it go. I started by submitting a Freedom of Information Act request to the County Building Commission. I asked for all permits, inspections, and environmental assessments tied to the HOA's name or Brenda's property management company. It took about 3 weeks, but when the documents arrived, one in particular jumped out at me. An approval for a soil remediation project near the retention pond just south of the lake trail, dated mid-September, 2 months before Brenda had tried to ban my kids from riding bikes. The signature on the application wasn't Brenda's. It belonged to a man named Daniel Hoerner. I had never heard the name before. But when I ran it through the state licensing board, it came back with a revoked contractor's license and a past conviction for falsifying environmental compliance reports in another county. That was the first real crack. I sat down with Marisol, one of the neighbors who'd helped expose the financial misconduct, and showed her the paperwork. "This guy Daniel," I said, pointing to the signature. "He was paid almost $9,000 for a cleanup project that never happened. I've walked past that pond 100 times. There's nothing there but cattails and a broken sign." She studied the report. So either Brenda was funneling money to a fake contractor, or she was covering something up. We went to the county records office together. Marisol had experience navigating government bureaucracy from her years in hospital administration, and it made all the difference. She helped track down a series of utility filings tied to the HOA's parcel specifically. A set of emergency access permits requested under Brenda's authority the previous summer. They had been fast-tracked through zoning under the claim that a buried gas line needed to be rerouted following a small leak. Only, there was no record of such a leak reported to the gas company. The permits had allowed a trench to be dug near the retention pond. The inspection report was signed off 2 days later, with no follow-up. I emailed the county assessor's office, posing as a freelance researcher, and got access to archived drone footage used for property tax assessments. When I cross-referenced the time frame, there was only one image that showed the retention pond area during the relevant week. There had been a backhoe and a flatbed truck. The trench had been real, but whatever they were burying had been covered up fast. "I think we need to go higher," Marisol said. We handed everything over to the county district attorney's office. Within a few days, we were contacted by a detective named Leary from the Environmental Crimes Unit. He didn't say much at first, but he asked for everything: digital copies, paper files, even our notes. 2 weeks later, he asked to meet. We sat down at a diner just off Route 7 where Leary laid it out. "Seems your former HOA president had more going on than we thought," he said, sliding a photo across the table. It showed a series of rust-covered drums, half buried in soil, the tops warped from pressure. "Those were taken last weekend," he said. "We excavated the area under a sealed warrant. There were 6 barrels, unregistered, unmarked, and leaking." Marisol's eyes widened. "What was inside? Industrial solvents, some of the worst kind, stuff that hasn't been legal to dispose of like this since the early 90s. I leaned back, stunned. "She dumped toxic waste in a residential neighborhood." "Not just her," Leary said. "Our working theory is that she was paid to store them there for someone else. Hoerner's name is all over this. We've got warrants out for him too." "What about the kids who played down there?" Marisol asked. "We've already contacted the health department. They're running soil and water tests. If contamination levels are above threshold, we'll issue a community alert and coordinate medical screenings." It hit me then how close Odette and Oliver had come to playing near that pond. They'd gone down there with friends more than once before Brenda ever said a word. Maybe that's why she'd tried to force us off the trail, not out of spite, but to keep us away from something dangerous. The following Monday, a full environmental response team showed up in hazmat suits. Word spread fast. News vans parked along the street. Yellow tape went up around the pond, and a temporary fence was installed. Residents gathered in clusters, watching as the barrels were loaded onto containment trucks. At a town hall meeting held the next evening at the local library, Leary addressed the neighborhood directly. The HOA leadership knowingly accepted hazardous materials and concealed their presence, he said. "We believe this was part of an off-the-books disposal agreement involving at least 2 parties who have since fled the state." The room was dead silent. Brenda, already under house arrest for the financial charges, was now facing a whole new slate of criminal allegations: felony environmental endangerment, illegal waste disposal, conspiracy to conceal hazardous materials, and reckless endangerment of minors. She was taken into custody the next morning in full view of the neighborhood. No one watched from behind curtains this time. People stood outside openly as the cruiser pulled away. Mr. Jenkins folded his arms. Marisol stood beside me, quiet. Even the teenagers who usually kept to themselves hovered on their bikes, eyes wide. The state filed a civil suit against Brenda's company, seeking restitution for environmental cleanup. The HOA board was officially dissolved by court order, and a trust was established to oversee any remaining funds now redirected to pay for medical testing and soil remediation. And the retention pond. It was drained, dredged, and marked for long-term ecological recovery. The area around it was closed off indefinitely. A month later, the community formed a new oversight committee, not for enforcement, but for transparency. Volunteers from every corner of the neighborhood joined in, including Colin and Marisol. I didn't run for anything, but I helped set up the new website, a simple place where residents could access meeting notes, budget records, and vote on decisions. No more closed-door policies. No more forged signatures. No more secrets. One Saturday, I was sitting on the porch, watching Oliver try to teach Odette how to throw a spiral, when Colin walked up with a manila envelope. "We just got the final report from the environmental team," he said. "They cleared the lake trail. No contamination spread beyond the pond." I let out a long breath. "That's something." "Also," he added, pulling out a laminated certificate, "the county is formally recognizing the Residents Committee as the new governing body. No more HOA." He handed it to me, but I shook my head. "Hang it in the new meeting room. I've had enough paperwork to last a lifetime." He laughed and turned to leave. As the sun dipped below the tree line, I looked out at the lake. Calm waters, families walking, kids laughing. No more threats, no more surveillance. Brenda had tried to erase our presence from the lake trail. Turns out, the only thing she erased was her own legacy, and our trail was more alive than ever. The night after the official announcement came down, the one that stripped the HOA's legal authority for good. I sat out on the back deck with a mug of black coffee and a quiet sense of disbelief. It wasn't over exactly. Some things would take time to settle. But the power structure that had once hovered over every porch light and mailbox color was gone, and the neighborhood, it was waking up. The first time I saw real change was the next morning. An older resident named Mr. Weller, who'd kept to himself since long before I moved in, was repainting his garage door a bright turquoise. No permit, no passive-aggressive forms taped to his door. Just a man, a brush, and a color that made him happy. I passed by with Oliver, who was bouncing a basketball. "I like the new look," I said. Mr. Weller didn't pause. "Always wanted to try it, didn't want a fine. You're good now, no one's gonna stop you." He dipped his brush again. "I know, finally feels like I live here." Later that week, the county hosted a public hearing at the Civic Center. This wasn't about Brenda anymore. It was about accountability and fixing the gap that had allowed an unregulated HOA to become both judge and executioner in a neighborhood that never voted for any of it. Marisol sat beside me in the front row, her hands folded tight. On stage, the county commissioner leaned into the microphone. "We're proposing a new system for neighborhoods like this one," she said. "A structure rooted in public transparency, with oversight from elected representatives, not closed-door boards." A few residents raised questions about what that would mean. Would there be dues? Would there be enforcement again? The commissioner shook her head. "This isn't about bringing back control. It's about giving you tools. If you want to organize community cleanups, you can. If you want to hold monthly meetings, great. But no one can issue fines, citations, or demand access to your deeds." That got a round of applause. Back home, I finally tackled the garage. Brenda had flagged me for visible tool storage once, even though the tools had been behind a curtain. Now I tore the curtain down and installed a pegboard with proper mounts. It felt good, practical, honest. A few days later, I got an unexpected call from Detective Leary. "We've located Horner," he said without preamble. "He was hiding out in a cabin in Pike County, tried to cross state lines with a fake license. Is he cooperating? Not exactly, but we seized his laptop. It confirms he handled multiple illegal disposals. Brenda's pond wasn't the first. Anything tying others to it." There was a pause. "There were invoices sent to another HOA, one in a gated golf course community 2 towns over. Similar signatures, same disposal methods." My stomach tightened. "How deep does this go?" "We're working on it. But I'll tell you this, you and your neighbors exposing her forced our hand. This whole operation might have stayed hidden if you hadn't started asking questions." After we hung up, I sat back and tried to picture Brenda during her reign. How many people had she intimidated? How many turned the other way because it was easier than fighting? The state eventually charged her with conspiracy and environmental endangerment in addition to the fraud charges. She pled guilty to avoid a full trial. Part of her plea agreement required her to testify against Horner and any other accomplices he'd worked with. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison, plus restitution to the neighborhood. Her house was seized and sold, with the proceeds going toward the cleanup trust. The day the moving truck pulled into her driveway, no one came out to watch. Not because they didn't care, but because it was done. No one needed to gloat. She'd already lost everything that mattered to her, and not just her position or her house. She lost the power she'd built her identity around. Weeks passed, and the neighborhood kept moving forward. Marisol organized a spring festival. Colin built a lending library box near the trail entrance. The Jenkinses adopted a rescue dog who barked at everyone but always wagged his tail after. As for me, I finally got around to building that treehouse Odette and Oliver had been asking for. Nothing too fancy, just a solid platform, some railings, and a rope ladder. They helped with the painting. Every color was their choice. One afternoon, while they played up there with two friends from down the block, I heard someone approach from behind. "Looks good," said a voice. I turned. Mr. Cho, who lived at the end of the street, stood with his hands in his jacket pockets. I hadn't spoken to him much before. He'd been one of the more cautious residents, always polite but distant. "Thanks," I said. "Kids are thrilled." He looked up at the treehouse, then back at me. "I wasn't sure about you when you moved in," he admitted. "You came in during all that mess." I raised an eyebrow. "Can't blame you. But you didn't just push back, you pulled people together. That's rare," I shrugged. "Just didn't like being told my kids couldn't ride their bikes. That's what started it," he nodded. Sometimes all it takes is one person not letting something slide. I didn't say anything. He gave a small wave and walked off. The next weekend, the new community group, now officially recognized by the county, held its first open meeting in the park. No rules, no dress code. Just neighbors bringing folding chairs and snacks. Marisol handed out printed agendas, though most people just chatted and offered suggestions. A few teens moderated the event with a homemade megaphone and jokes. At one point, someone suggested converting the old HOA office into a youth center. The motion passed with a show of hands. That night, as the sun set and the last folding chair was packed away, I walked the trail with Odette and Oliver. The lake shimmered, calm and unbothered. A heron stood motionless near the reeds, watching something we couldn't see. "Dad," said Odette, "can we bring our friends here again next weekend?" "Of course," I said. She looked back toward the tree line. "You think the bad lady's ever coming back?" "No," I said. "She's gone." Oliver kicked a loose stone and nodded. "Good." We kept walking, the gravel crunching beneath our feet. The trees swayed gently overhead and the trail curved forward into the dusk. In the end, it wasn't just about the deed, or the laws, or even the barrels we unearthed. It was about reclaiming something we'd forgotten we had. A say. A voice. A right to be here without fear or permission slips from people who never earned the authority they wielded. Brenda had tried to erase that. She failed, and our trail would always be there to prove it.